And we are live. Okay, hi, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining us today for our briefing session titled EUDR Under Pressure. Chris, who is our Director of Product for the TradeAware product, and I will try to clear things up for you today about a potential EUDR delay. So I think this is also, there has been a lot of discussion online about the potential of another delay of the enforcement or postponement of the enforcement date of the EU deforestation regulation. I suppose that's why you joined this event today in very large numbers. And what we've seen over the past few weeks is that there has been a lot of confusion, but also some misinformation, not only on LinkedIn, but also from media outlets. And we want to clear things up and also explain to you what is actually going on also over the coming few weeks. So you can take the right decision for your organization. So with this, this is our agenda today. So the quick intro, that's where we are right now. We will have a quick look at what happened so far, what is the status right now, what didn't happen, then what might happen next, and how do things work basically, and then what should what should you do in terms of EUDR compliance? What are the sensible next steps for organizations who are regulated under EUDR. So before we start, quickly, somebody asked in the chat already, the session will be recorded and we will send out an email with a link to the recording tomorrow. And then also this email will also have the essential information from this session already in text form, easy to share. And with that, I think we can jump in. So first, I said it already a little bit, but basically there has been misinformation. So right now, as we speak today, the legal status is the EUDR enforcement date is still December 30, 2025. So as of now, the EU deforestation regulation has not been postponed to 26. This is very important to set this straight right from the beginning. And now we will get into what might happen in the future. But this is the status today. The enforcement date is unchanged. So what has happened so far is this is basically the only thing that has happened so far. The commissioner for the Environment, Water Resilience and Competitive Circular Economy group in the European Commission has sent a letter to basically their counterparts in the European Parliament, the head of the committee there, the respective committee, and to the council. So, and in this letter, the commissioner announced basically that the commission is considering proposing a postponement. So the reason that was stated is a lack of readiness of the IT system traces. Some say also political factors play a role because it coincided with trade negotiations with both the United States and Indonesia. But this is basically what happened today. It's like I think you could say this is like a heads up. She explains what their considerations are, and she announces that they are considering to propose an amendment, because this is very important. The European Commission, we will get into the institutions and what role they play basically in a minute, or Chris will explain it to you. But this is important to understand. You know, we have basically three institutions: the European Commission, which is basically the Parliament, and then you have the directly elected. The Commission is the government basically, so the executive, and then you have two legislative chambers: the Parliament, which is directly elected by European citizens, and then the Council, which consists of basically the ministers in the different countries for the different resorts. The Commission, as the executive body, cannot decide on the postponement because it's written in the law. The EUDR is a law, a legal text, and they cannot just say, we change this. It has to be done by the legislative branch, which is the two chambers, the council and the parliament. So that means in order to change the enforcement date of the EUDR, the Commission has to make a proposal to the legislative branch to change the law. And what that looks like, we will get into in a minute. What we can say, it's a tight timeline if they actually want to change it. Last year, as the veterans among us remember, there has been a 1-year delay or postponement to the enforcement date. Originally, it was planned to enter into force at the end of 24. And there was also a very tight schedule. And in the end, the decision was officially published on December 23. So that's when it entered the legal journal of the European Union. And as you see here on the slides, on the 18th of December last year, the Council agreed on the proposal that was made back then by the Commission, or was negotiated between the Parliament, the Commission, and the Council. All right. So this is a divided issue, you can say. So we will also get into that a little bit. What you can say is there are industry associations who support it today because they say the arguments are the timelines are unfeasible. There's fear of market disruptions and so forth. Those we see mostly from producer, so agricultural associations. And then on the other hand, the industry also is divided on this. There's also a strong coalition of big companies, as you see here on the right-hand side. Also here, Street Trunks, one of our customers, who basically say they are ready. It is possible to do this, and they argue for introducing a short grace period for IT problems to be figured out in a production environment, basically, and just go with the original enforcement deadline. So that's there's no clear industry standpoint as a whole on this topic, basically. Then we have NGOs who are very strongly against any amendment to the regulation. This one is by Mighty Earth, you see here, and then this was my favorite, by WWF, The Dog Ate My Homework, Commission loses face over EUDR IT mess up. So here you see there the position is very clear. Environmental NGOs really don't want any postponement or other weakening of the regulation. Okay, wait, somebody says webinar is not working. Barbara Bradford, can somebody else? It's working for me. Okay, just to make sure it's not. Okay, maybe Barbara, if you try to reload the page, maybe then it works for you. Thank you for confirming. Okay, perfect. Then let's move on, and with this, I will hand it over to you, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Andreas. Many years ago, when I was studying law at university, I never thought I'd be sitting telling people how EU institutions work, but there you go. But it is a little bit of a complicated process of how these interact with each other, and this is why we wanted to explain these a little bit today as well. So, in effect, for a delay to the regulation to happen, it follows the sort of legislative process of the EU. And for that to happen, all three institutions have to agree with each other effectively. The European Commission, because the European Commission are the ones who have right of initiative, they're the ones who are allowed to propose a change to the law. And then the Parliament and the Council is the two sort of voting bodies of the EU. And one thing that we wanted to share here is really a little bit the difference in opinions across those three institutions. So the Parliament is perhaps where we see the most sort of division in opinion at the minute. It's probably the most complex institution, the one with the most sort of varied voices that are coming out of it. So in the European Parliament, we see the EPP, which is a faction in the European Parliament that we'll talk a little bit more about. They're really the ones who are driving demands for delay, but they don't have sufficient votes for a majority. And so whatever happens will likely come down to who they can actually form a majority with. So that would either be, and we can talk a little more about this, of the potential majorities that they can reach. But the more likely one would be voting with the SD and the Greens, which are another faction as well, who are more reluctant to see changes in the regulation and have been very vocal about that, about changes in the delay. They're less likely to vote with the far right for obvious sort of political reasons around sort of cordon sanitaire and things like that. That it's not really something that they want to do as the EPP. So those voting blocks become quite important in terms of what happens. In terms of the council, a little simpler there, but we still see divisions. We see some countries, Austria, Finland, Luxembourg, are pro a delay and additional simplification. And then other countries on the council have been against amendments, so Spain and France. And then at the same time, the Commission, the ones who initiate the proposal, they've only talked about a delay so far. So the letter that was coming from Jessica Roswell was only about a delay. So we see the sort of divided opinions among these among the three institutions that need to effectively agree with each other to make any changes to the EUDR. If you go to the next slide, Andreas. And this just helps you to see a little bit of the different factions. And effectively, these end up being groupings of the parties that we have in the individual member states of the EU. And so even within these, there can be some level of division as well. So the EPP, who form the largest section of the European Parliament, but again, by no means a majority, you see that they're divided up again into the different national parties that are behind that. So, for example, the Christian Democratic Union in Germany, the People's Party in Spain, Forza Italia, and then whoever they would make a coalition with to pass a vote, the S&D, so that's the Social Democratic Party in Germany, and then you also see the other potential options that they have there as well. So again, we have the high-level fractions, the high-level groupings, and then behind that are the individual national parties that are formed that form those as well. So the most likely path towards any sort of agreement on any change would basically be with S&D and Renew. That's the most sort of, as we've seen recently, the most sort of politically safe option, really. So the most likely configuration would be around that, but we do still see some issues there around that could lead to procedural gridlock around the difference in positions that we have between the EPP and S&D and Renew and with the Greens and the left. That's also likely to cause potential issues in any amendment process. So we see an unlikely configuration would be the EPP voting with the far right parties involved. Oh, sorry, I've just lost you there. That's a configuration that would probably look to make some more amendments to the regulation. But we also see that as a sort of coalition that's sort of politically unattractive. On the other hand, we have this sort of reluctant configuration that's likely to lead to that if it comes to pass would be lighter in terms of any changes that would be made, which would be the EPP, the S&D and Renew, and in which case that would be the delay is probably the only thing that would be attractive to that group. And we still see, obviously, even within that, quite a lot of pushback on the prospect of a delay itself. And if you go to the next slide, Andreas. Yeah, this is quite a terrifying looking diagram, but in effect, it captures what has to happen between where we are now and the actual any changes being made to EUDR. And I think we're actually even missing a step there, which Andreas had mentioned already, is that the Commission has to make a formal proposal first, which hasn't happened. So in effect, we're at step 0 so far. A letter's been sent, but no formal proposal that anybody can vote on. So what would happen is we have here, the first thing that happens is it goes to the European Parliament. The European Parliament can reject it, or they can adopt it with or without proposing amendments. Thanks for highlighting there, Andreas, as well. If, depending on what the European Parliament would do, if they adopt it with or without amendments, if they adopt it without amendments, then the Council can adopt it, and then that becomes European Union law. If the European Parliament adopts it with amendments, then it becomes a question of whether or not the Council adopts it with those amendments as well. If they don't, then effectively we have to go to a sort of second step of the European Parliament again has to review the Council's amendments and whether or not they would adopt those. And then effectively we end up in this position of what's known as trilogue. And this is what happened last year, effectively. We went through this whole process because what happened was the Parliament wanted to make amendments to the regulation and not just put a delay in place. And that ended up stretching out the timeline because then the Council had a different position to the Parliament, and it ended up having to go to this thing called trilogue, which is where the Commission, the Council, and the Parliament have to get together and sort of come to a compromise agreement. If they can't come to a compromise agreement, then the default position is the regulation comes in force at the end of the year, as it currently would. Alternatively, if they can reach a compromise agreement, then the regulation is postponed. But again, that requires those 3 institutions to agree with each other for anything to change. If you go to the next slide, Andreas. And I think something important to point out there as well is that the timeline is really tight for this as well, which also increases the risk that default position could happen of the regulation comes into force by default. So we only have 3 plenary sessions. That's the European Parliament's sittings. We only have 3 of those left in the calendar year. We have 4, sorry, but the amendment to EUDR is not on the agenda for the one that's coming up next week. So with it not being on the agenda, it can't be voted on because again, the Commission haven't made a formal proposal yet. So in effect, there's nothing to vote on. So it comes down to these 3 final plenary sessions of the year for the Parliament. And then effectively, we have a similar number of council meetings as well of the European Council. So we do have a very tight timeline. And again, just a reminder on last year, I think interesting turn of phrase, Andreas referring to us as veterans who went through the last one. But last year, this was agreed very much at the last minute because of these attempts to amend. It was the Parliament voted on this on the 17th of December and the Council voted on it on the 18th of December. So the timeline is very tight, and if anything does happen, it's likely to be very much at the last minute. And if you go to the next one, Andreas. So we end up in effect with three possible scenarios. One is a procedural gridlock. That can happen if those 3 institutions can't agree with each other. So in that case, the law effectively remains as is. It's not possible for the Commission to introduce a delay alone. It would be that the regulation comes into force at the end of the year, as it currently would. The other position is that we have a delay of a year. Again, if those 3 institutions can agree with each other in the timeline that's left. And then the third option is that the third possible scenario is that there are amendments to the regulation. That's very unlikely to happen before the end of the year, because as we showed, the timeline is so tight, it would be very unlikely that could happen, but that would potentially be the addition of something like a no-risk category or or first touch principle in addition to a delay. In effect, the main thing is in all the three scenarios that we see as being particularly feasible and we see being discussed, the EUDR does still remain. We aren't seeing a lot of calls or a lot of calls that are coming from prominent positions that would particularly change that. So in all of these possible scenarios, you would still remain having EUDR and having the obligations that result from it. If you got a... So I think against that background, what we'd really recommend to people is that we are dealing with basically a space of pretty high uncertainty, and we're in a position where effectively nothing has changed so far. So against that background of nothing having formally changed, a pretty varied number of scenarios and not a lot of visibility into which of those scenarios will come to pass, our advice to people would still be that it's good to get through the process of moving towards compliance in any of those scenarios. So our key takeaways that we would give to people would be that at the minute we do have this total uncertainty about the enforcement date. As it stands, it'll come into force by default at the end of the year. It all depends on what comes about between those three institutions. In any case, we see that the law will remain largely intact, even at the most extreme negotiating positions we're seeing. It's sort of minor changes to scope, not actual changes to the requirements of the regulation. So the responsibilities will remain largely unchanged. Another thing that we've consistently seen over time in the process of working with a lot of the customers that we've been working with is that getting into a good place on implementation can take a lot of time. From a platform position, we can have somebody working on a platform straight away. But in terms of the process of with other internal priorities that you have, or the process of driving supplier engagement, or building out an integration, that can take a lot of time if you're not ready for it. And so that's another thing where it's good to use that extra time to start to get ready. And then the other thing that we see is that having good supply chain visibility obviously strengthens resilience for companies in general, not just about EUDR, but about some of the other challenges you face around perhaps around visibility into your supply chains for tariffs, or visibility in your supply chain for other due diligence exercises. So our recommendation would be really to protect your organization from the uncertainty and to continue making progress. If you really down tools at this point, I think there's one of two things that could happen. One is that you still have the underlying risk that the regulation comes into force by default. Even if it doesn't, and the three institutions manage to agree and a delay is put in place, it's still good to use that time. I've seen this time and again from other regulations that I've worked on, that companies that down tools when there's any indication of a delay almost always are in a worse position when they start picking it up again. And it's better just to sort of continue with that progress. We'd really recommend to start implementing without panic. Again, even if this timeline extends out, that gives you more scope to do this in a more relaxed way, if you could call it that. And we'd say following an orderly process to collaborate with your suppliers. I know we've seen this a lot from companies in a lot of different supply chains, that for some companies and supply chains, this is feeling really unfair, this process, that a lot of companies that have invested a lot of effort into getting this data together, particularly whole supply chains in countries that have really put a lot of effort into getting their data ready and being in a position to prove compliance with the EUDR, feel they've been put at a disadvantage. So sort of continuing with that data and with those suppliers we see as a really effective thing. And then of course, if any delay does come to pass, then using that time to really be in a place where you have a good solid operation for when the law does come into force, or even for some of the other kind of challenges you might be seeing in your supply chain around due diligence. And yeah, and then I guess the the other thing to say, if you go to the next slide, Andreas, is of course that Liveo and our product TradeAware remains here, of course, to help, irrespective of what comes to pass. If the law comes into force at the end of the year, then we're in a position to help companies start to get ready for that. If anything else happens, we're also still in a good place, and we have some of the companies here that trust us to help them to. They've trusted us to help them be in a place to be compliant with the EUDR today. And yeah, I think that's it, Andreas.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, maybe we can take one or two questions, because there've been a few. For example, I saw one. So once we're at it, maybe we can clear up this misunderstanding too. So there's a question whether the about the EP having rejected the council's country risk benchmarking in July, and I think there's also a common misunderstanding. Maybe you can.
That's a really good one, and that's a common misunderstanding. So in the regulation, the ability to actually make the country benchmarking is effectively delegated to the Commission. It's actually one of the it's something that's not actually dependent on the Council and the Parliament voting on it. So the Parliament rejecting the benchmarking is in effect symbolic. The benchmarking as it is still stands. The only people, either the Commission can change the benchmarking, or the Parliament and the Council at the instigation of the Commission can change the law so that somebody else can make the benchmarking. But that actual rejection is purely symbolic.
Okay. Then there's another statement. We wish to go for EUDR by the end of this year, but most pulp suppliers are not ready with SAP and systems that give crystal clear data of geolocation and transit. I think this is just a very good illustration of what you just said. Basically, it takes time to coordinate with suppliers for everybody to get ready. So this is probably not something you want to do in the last minute.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we see it. We see different levels of readiness across industries. Absolutely. And I think the main thing there is to sort of continue on with the process. And also, to make sure that the information we've been sharing today is shared with your suppliers, so that they aren't under any false impressions of what's going on at the minute. Yeah, I would say really to continue on with that process. And I would also offer that if anybody is looking to get more information and to learn more, and to maybe get a little bit more guidance on this, then absolutely reach out to us, and our account executives would be happy to sit down with you and talk you through a little bit more of what they're seeing from industry leaders who are a little further ahead with compliance readiness, and they can talk to you a little bit more about best practice as well. So that's an open offer if anybody wants to reach out to learn more.
Perfect. Then thank you so much, Chris. And thanks everybody for attending. We hope we could clear things up a little bit. And yeah, until next time. Thank you.
Thank you.